Before we begin tonight's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear isn't just another headline. It's the chilling truth about how love can twist into hate, how a teenager's secret life turned deadly, and how a courtroom full of tears watched innocence crumble forever. This is the story of Carly Madison Greg, a 15-year-old girl from Mississippi, whose smile hid a darkness even her own mother couldn't see. The story begins in the heart of Mississippi, in a town where time moves slow, church bells echo every Sunday morning, and everyone seems to know everyone else. Carly Madison Greg grew up in one of those neighborhoods where front porches had rocking chairs and mothers reminded their kids to say grace before dinner. Her mother, Ashley Smiley, was a high school math teacher, kind, patient, and respected. Her stepfather, Heath Smiley, was a hardworking man who ran a small home repair business. To outsiders, the Greg Smileys looked picture perfect. Ashley, the warm, dedicated mom, Heath, the reliable father figure, and Carly, the quiet, polite honor student who always carried her phone, her earbuds, and a faint, mysterious smile. But like most stories that end in tragedy, the cracks had started forming long before anyone noticed. At school, Carly wasn't exactly popular, but she was known. Teachers described her as bright but distracted. Friends said she could be sweet one moment and distant the next. She wasn't a troublemaker, at least not in public. But behind closed doors, Carly had started exploring things far beyond her age. Late-night messages, secret social media accounts, and a small circle of online friends who glamorized rebellion. She'd begun smoking weed occasionally, hiding it from her parents. It was her form of escape, from expectations, from rules, and perhaps from the gnawing emptiness that grew inside her. Her mother, Ashley, had started noticing the missing money, the change in attitude, the secretiveness that replaced the cheerful girl she once tucked into bed. It all came to a head one weekend in March 2023, when one of Carly's friends, scared of what was happening, messaged Ashley, telling her that her daughter had been using marijuana. For Ashley, it wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. She thought she could fix it. She thought it was just a phase. But that night, something shifted forever. The Smiley home was quiet, too quiet. Ashley sat at the kitchen table, her phone in her hand, the text from Carly's friend still on the screen. She waited for her daughter to come home. When Carly walked through the door, she knew immediately that something was wrong. Her mother's eyes were red. The silence was thick. "We need to talk," Ashley said softly. Carly dropped her bag and rolled her eyes. Another lecture, she thought. Another round of disappointment. But this time, Ashley wasn't angry. She was terrified. She begged her daughter to tell the truth. She asked about the weed, about where she got it, about who she was hanging out with. Carly denied it at first. Then she snapped, shouting, slamming doors, accusing her mother of being controlling. Heath tried to step in, but Carly stormed off to her room. The sound of her door slamming echoed through the house like thunder. Ashley sat in tears that night, whispering to Heath, "I don't know who she is anymore." Heath put a hand on her shoulder. "She's just a kid, Ash. She'll come around." But neither of them knew how wrong he was. The next morning felt like any other. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. The smell of coffee filled the air, and Ashley packed papers into her tote bag for school. Carly came downstairs wearing her usual hoodie and jeans, her face blank. "Morning," her mother said softly. Carly didn't respond. They drove to school in silence. Ashley tried to talk, to apologize, to bridge the gap, but every word hit a wall of cold indifference. She dropped Carly off, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When Carly walked into school, her friends noticed she wasn't herself. She looked numb, empty, almost like she wasn't there. No one knew that by the end of that day, one of them would be dead. That afternoon, while Ashley was still at school grading papers, Carly was already home. She'd skipped her last class. She'd been thinking all day about the argument, the control, the constant feeling of being trapped. And something inside her snapped. She walked into her stepfather's bedroom and opened the drawer where he kept his handgun. A 9mm pistol, legally owned, used only for home safety. She held it in her hands for a long time, staring at it, her reflection shimmering on the cold metal. Maybe she didn't mean to use it. Maybe she just wanted to scare her mother. But when anger mixes with impulsive youth, intent becomes irrelevant. Ashley came home around 5 p.m. Carly was waiting in the kitchen, the gun tucked behind her back. "Carly," her mother said, setting down her bag. "We're going to talk about this like adults." Carly nodded, and then she smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible. The kind of smile that chills your spine because it doesn't belong on a child's face. Seconds later, neighbors heard 3 sharp cracks echo through Maple Drive. Pop, pop, pop. Ashley Smiley, beloved teacher, mother, and wife, was gone. Carly stood there for a moment, staring at her mother's body. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she took out her phone. Text messages recovered later showed her casually chatting with friends, even playing with her dogs, while her mother lay lifeless on the kitchen floor. Minutes later, Heath Smiley's truck pulled into the driveway. The front door opened. "Hey, sweetheart, where's your mom?" The gun went off again. Heath felt a burning pain in his face, stumbling backward. The door frame splintered as he fell to the floor. Bleeding, half blind, Heath fought for the gun, wrestling it out of Carly's grip. In the chaos, she screamed, "I put 3 in my mom and got 3 more waiting for you." He managed to grab the gun, throw it aside, and dial 911 with shaking hands. "My stepdaughter. She shot her mom. She shot me." Carly stood in the corner, silent, her hands trembling. Not with regret, but with disbelief. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She just waited. The flashing red and blue lights painted the front yard like a nightmare. Neighbors gathered in shock as police led the 15-year-old girl out of the house in handcuffs. Her expression was blank. No tears, no screams, just silence. Inside the house, paramedics confirmed Ashley was gone. Heath was barely conscious but alive. As officers read Carly her rights, she looked up and for the first time smiled. A faint, eerie smile that one detective would later describe as the scariest thing I've ever seen on a child. That night, she was taken to the County Juvenile Detention Center. News spread fast. 15-year-old girl kills her mother, shoots stepfather. The small town of Mississippi was shaken to its core. Inside a cold, gray room, Carly sat with her hands cuffed to the table. 2 detectives entered, one older, one young. "Carly, we need to know what happened," the older one said gently. "Was it an accident?" She looked up slowly. "No," she said quietly. "She told on me. She ruined everything." "Ruined what, sweetheart?" "Everything." Her voice cracked, but her face stayed calm. She talked about control, about being treated like a child, about feeling trapped. When asked if she regretted it, she hesitated, then shook her head. "I just wanted it to stop." Psychologists later said Carly had signs of severe emotional dysregulation, possibly depression, trauma, or early signs of a personality disorder. But that didn't change what she'd done. The prosecution saw a cold-blooded killer. The defense saw a mentally unstable child. The truth? Maybe both were right. But one thing was certain. A family was destroyed, and a mother's love had turned into her own undoing. Previously, we saw how a quiet Mississippi teenager, 15-year-old Carly Madison Greg, turned her home into a crime scene. Her mother dead, her stepfather clinging to life, and a small town forever changed. But tonight, we step behind the police station walls, inside the cold gray room where detectives tried to understand why. What they found wasn't just shocking. It was haunting. The sound of metal doors slamming echoed through the county station. Carly sat alone on a narrow bench, wearing a gray detention jumpsuit, her wrists still red from the cuffs. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Outside, through the small rectangular window, an officer stood watch, motionless, arms folded. Inside the cell, Carly didn't cry. She didn't ask for her mother. She just stared at the wall, tracing invisible lines with her fingertip. Hours passed before 2 detectives entered. Detective Rena Carter, a 15-year veteran of the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, and Detective Kyle Raines, younger, sharper, but visibly nervous. They'd both seen homicides, but never one like this. Never one where the killer still had braces on her teeth. The room was small. A table, 2 chairs, a camera on the wall blinking red. Carly was led in quietly. She sat down, her feet barely touching the floor. Rains placed a bottle of water in front of her, untouched. Carter leaned forward, her tone calm, almost maternal. Carly, sweetheart, can you tell us what happened tonight? Carly, she told on me. Carter, who told on you? Carly, my mom. She told everyone I smoke weed. She made me look like a junkie. Her voice was steady, eerily calm. The detectives exchanged a glance. Rains, so, you were angry? Carly, no, I was done. A pause. Carter adjusted her chair slightly. Carly, when you say done, what does that mean? Carly, it means I wasn't gonna let her control me anymore. She always had to win, always had to make me feel small. Her hands twisted together on the table. Not in fear, but in quiet frustration, like a teenager venting about chores. Detective Carter pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed record. Carter, tell me what happened after your mom came home. Carly, she came in the kitchen. I had the gun. I hid it behind my back. She started talking, lecturing, crying. I told her to stop. Carter, did she stop? Carly, no, she never stops. She looked down for a moment, then lifted her head. Eyes blank, voice flat. Carly, so I pulled the trigger. The words hung in the air like smoke. Rains leaned back in disbelief. Carter, how many times, Carly? Carly, 3. Carter, and your stepfather? Carly, he came home. I was gonna finish it, but he fought back. She said it like she was describing a scene in a movie, detached, unshaken. When Carter asked why, Carly tilted her head. Carly, because she made me hate her, because she ruined my life. Carter stopped the recording. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rains looked at the girl sitting across from him, this small, fragile 15-year-old, and couldn't reconcile the facts. The surveillance footage, the ballistic evidence, the text messages all pointed to her. But what chilled him most wasn't the act. It was the calm. He stood up and walked to the door. We're done here, he muttered. Carter stayed seated, staring at Carly. Carter, you know what's going to happen next, right? Carly, yeah. Carter, you're going to court. They'll show everything. The jury will see that video. Carly, I don't care. Carter, you don't care if you go to prison for life? Carly, I'm already there. The older detective froze. For a moment, she saw it. The pain buried deep behind the defiance. A child drowning, but refusing to reach for help. Later that night, officers reviewed everything. The home surveillance footage showing Carly pacing in the kitchen with the gun. The text logs, where she sent messages minutes after shooting her mother. The 9/11 recording with Heath's panicked voice. It was all undeniable. But there was one piece that broke everyone. The security footage showing Carly petting her dogs right after the murder, as if nothing happened. One officer watching the footage whispered, She's playing with the dogs. Another replied quietly, like she didn't just kill her mom. 2 days later, the small-town courthouse overflowed with reporters. Every seat filled, every hallway buzzing with whispers. 15 years old. Shot her mom in cold blood. Was she possessed or just broken? Carly walked in, escorted by deputies. She wore a loose gray hoodie and shackles around her ankles. Her face was pale, but her eyes, sharp, cold, scanned the crowd. Some people gasped. Others looked away. But when she sat down beside her public defender, she smiled faintly, just for a second. That same haunting, unreadable smile. The defense tried everything. They brought in psychiatrists, childhood experts, even family friends who spoke of mental health struggles. One therapist testified, Carly suffered from major depressive disorder and trauma-induced dissociation. She didn't fully comprehend her actions. But the prosecution had a different story. They showed the jury the surveillance footage. They played her interrogation recording. They read her text messages aloud. One message read, "I put 3 in my mom. Got 3 more waiting for my stepdad." The courtroom went silent. Even Carly's attorney put his hand over his face. After 5 days of testimony, closing arguments began. The prosecutor stood before the jury, voice trembling with anger. "Ladies and gentlemen, this was not the act of an insane child. This was the act of someone who knew what she was doing. She shot her mother in the face, waited for her stepfather, and texted about it. That's not confusion. That's cold intent." When the defense tried to appeal to sympathy, saying Carly was just a scared girl who lost control, the judge remained unmoved. Finally, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Foreperson, we, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, guilty on all charges. Carly sat still, her hands clasped. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. The court sentences you, Carly Madison Greg, to life imprisonment without parole. There was a collective gasp. Carly blinked once, twice, then her face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks for the first time. Her hands shook violently. The mask broke. As deputies led her away, Carly whispered something no one could forget. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop." Her voice was raw, not evil, not cruel, just lost. But it was too late. Ashley Smiley was gone. Heath was scarred for life, both physically and emotionally. And the world now saw Carly Gregg not as a daughter, but as a monster. Outside the courthouse, one juror told reporters, "She's evil. Sometimes evil just comes in young packages." Back on Maple Drive, the Smiley home stood silent. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind. Inside, the kitchen clock had stopped, frozen at 5:14 p.m., the moment everything ended. The walls still held the laughter of a family that no longer existed. Neighbors passed by and crossed themselves, whispering, "That's the house where the girl shot her mom." The dogs were taken by animal services. The house went up for sale, but no one wanted to buy it. The courtroom was tense, so quiet that even the sound of the air conditioner felt deafening. Reporters lined the benches, their pens ready, their cameras waiting for the face of a girl whose story had already gripped the nation. Carly Madison Greg, now 16, was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, wrists bound, eyes blank. She looked smaller than anyone remembered, as if the weight of what she'd done had finally pressed her into herself. The prosecutor, a tall, sharp-voiced man named Daniel Myers, wasted no time. He stood, facing the jury, and began, "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to hear isn't just about murder. It's about betrayal. It's about a daughter who looked her mother in the eye and pulled the trigger." The jury didn't flinch, but some of them glanced at Carly, searching for a hint of remorse. They found none. Daniel pressed play on the surveillance video. The courtroom lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. Carly appeared, pacing slowly, a handgun behind her back. She checked her phone, stroked one of the dogs, then raised the weapon. Flash. A sound so loud it made several people in the room jump. Gasps filled the air. Carly didn't react. She just stared at the screen, jaw tight. Then came the next clip, her stepfather, Heath Smiley, opening the door, barely a second before the gun went off again. On the audio, his voice cracked with fear and disbelief. She shot her mom. She shot her mom." He wrestled the gun from Carly, his breathing frantic as he made the 911 call that would later echo through every TV station in America. When the lights came back on, the courtroom felt frozen. The prosecutor turned to the jury. This was not an accident. This was not insanity. This was control. She executed her mother, then waited to do the same to her stepfather. Carly's defense attorney, Rachel Danner, rose slowly. She looked tired, like someone fighting a losing war. "Carly is a child," she said softly. "A child who snapped. She was suffering from a deep mental health crisis. She didn't understand the consequences of what she was doing. But the jury had already seen too much. The text messages Carly sent that night were projected on the screen. I put 3 in my mom. Got 3 left for my stepdad. Rachel's voice broke. That text doesn't come from evil. It comes from sickness. She needed help, not punishment. But the prosecutor's rebuttal was devastating. You think that sounds like a person who's insane? Or someone who knew exactly what she was doing? Carly lowered her head, hands trembling in her lap. Her eyes filled for the first time. Maybe from fear, maybe from shame. But when the jury left to deliberate, the outcome already felt certain. Took them just 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was calm, but final. We, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Greg, guilty on all charges. Carly froze. Her face turned pale. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For the first time since the shooting, she looked human. The judge's voice filled the silence. The defendant is hereby sentenced to life in prison without parole. The sound that followed wasn't a cry. It was a collapse. Carly broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, as if her body finally understood what her mind refused to believe. Her father, who had sat in silence the entire time, stood up and left the courtroom before the cameras could catch his tears. Carly was led away, her footsteps echoing through the hall. The prosecutor watched her go and whispered to a reporter nearby, "Evil doesn't always look old. Sometimes it comes in young packages." Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse. The story was already national news. Mississippi teen killer gets life without parole. But inside, a strange quiet lingered. Because for everyone who had watched that video, one haunting question remained. What could drive a 15-year-old girl to do something like this? When the gavel fell and the sentence was read, the courtroom's heavy air finally cracked open with whispers, camera flashes, and the soft, uncontrollable sobbing of one young girl whose life had just ended in a different way. Carly Madison Greg, age 15 at the time of the murder, 16 at sentencing, was officially condemned to spend the rest of her life in a cold concrete box. No parole, no freedom, no second chances. As deputies led her away, her voice trembled. Please tell my dad I'm sorry." But her father, a man broken beyond words, had already left the building. The following week, the nation was talking about her. Monster, evil, cold-blooded teen killer. News anchors debated whether someone so young could truly understand what life in prison meant. Psychologists appeared on talk shows saying Carly had the mind of a disturbed child. But to the families of the victims, Ashley Smiley's friends, her students, her husband Heath, it didn't matter. They had lost someone irreplaceable. No diagnosis or explanation could change that. Heath Smiley gave one interview months later. His voice cracked as he said, "I still see her, standing there, with the gun, and I still can't understand why." Inside the Mississippi Correctional Facility for Women, Carly struggled. She was kept in protective custody, away from older inmates for her own safety. Her days became a blur of isolation, therapy sessions, and long nights staring at the ceiling. She drew pictures of her mother. She wrote letters she couldn't send. And in one of those letters, later found in her file, she wrote, "I don't know why I did it. I thought I hated her, but now I dream about her every night." The defense appealed the sentence, arguing that a juvenile should not be condemned to life without parole, a punishment so final it offered no path to rehabilitation. But the court denied the appeal. The judge's written statement was blunt. The brutality and intent demonstrated by Ms. Gregg far exceeds the threshold for mercy. And with that, the case was closed. Years passed. The world moved on to new tragedies, new headlines. But inside prison walls, Carly grew older. Her hair darkened. Her face lost its childlike softness. And somewhere between the therapy sessions and endless gray mornings, she began to understand what she had truly done. A counselor who met her in 2024 described her like this: "She's not the same girl. She cries every time she talks about her mom. But remorse doesn't bring people back." Today, she's 23 years old, still serving her sentence, still in the same cell block where she once wrote letters of apology she could never send. The prison chaplain says Carly spends most of her time reading and praying, sometimes whispering the same words before bed every night. I wish I could go back. But time doesn't bend, and justice doesn't reverse. In a small cemetery in Mississippi, a granite headstone bears the name Ashley Smiley, beloved mother, teacher, and friend. Next to it, visitors often leave small notes, some from former students, some from strangers who only know her story. One note simply reads, "You deserve better." And that's the story of Carly Madison Greg, the 15-year-old girl who smiled in the courtroom, believing she'd walk free, and ended up walking into a life sentence she can never escape. Sometimes evil wears an innocent face, and sometimes it's just a broken child who can never undo what she's done. If the story gripped you, if it made you think about justice, childhood, and the darkness that sometimes hides behind young eyes, then hit subscribe, drop a like, and share your thoughts below. Because stories like these remind us that the line between innocence and evil is thinner than we ever imagined. This was the story of Carly Madison Greg, the girl who never came home.